Chapter 3, Interview, Ethical Design. Trina Falba is an experienced UX designer with a wide background in digital design. For 20 years, she's been driven to create value for people. She is a consultant, author of the Ethical Design Handbook, ethicaldesignhandbook.com, speaker and educator, and the founder of the Ethical Design Network, where ethical-minded designers from across the world come together to discuss how we can design ethically. Find out more about her work and ethical design training on her website, trinafalbe.com. TRINEFALBE. Debbie, how do you define customer centricity? Trina, customer centricity is having a focus on whoever uses, consumes, interacts, or anything in between with your product or your service. You must genuinely focus on them beyond looking at them as consumers, genuinely interested in their perspectives and the problems they have that your product or service should solve for them. Debbie, what is ethical design? Trina, the overarching definition is growing businesses, services, and products from a principle of fairness and fundamental respect toward everyone involved. It's not a siloed activity. It goes across the entire organization. Fundamental respect means that you respect their privacy, their freedom of choice, and their time and effort. But it also means that you respect the people who build the business, who build success in the products and services. To respect them fundamentally, you need to instill proper governance, autonomy, working conditions, and decision-making. Ethical design is about creating products that rest on sound principles like non-deceptive and trustworthy design. Ethical design and ethics tie into customer centricity in the way that you, as a company or as a professional, hold yourself accountable for providing value. Ethics, providing value, and being transparent are key. Debbie, it's very easy to spot some publicly known controversial, unethical decisions. What are some subtle or sneaky ways companies do unethical things? Trina, most of the more subtle examples are very often tied to data usage, especially outside of the European Union, because in the EU, we have GDPR and companies have to comply with those restrictions. But outside of the EU, I'm noticing that the cookie consent pop-ups make it super hard to not accept the terms and conditions. Sometimes it's impossible to say no to cookies. I make a point of never agreeing to cookies beyond the necessary cookies. I visited a service the other day where I couldn't do that. They didn't make that possible for me, and it made my blood boil. It's even harder for audiences that are vulnerable in some kind of sense to protect their data privacy. Figure 6. Screenshot from DHL's American Package Tracking website. There is no way to not accept cookies or control which cookies you accept. Debbie, it's a deceptive design move by making the granular selection of cookies so awful and complicated that you just want to say yes to all the cookies to make it go away. Trina, unethical design happens on different levels. It can be the result of actual harmful intent. It can also be due to a lack of knowledge. Maybe the team that created this thing used a deceptive design pattern because they were lazy and doing whatever was fastest. But it could also result from someone not knowing how to create something differently. I tend to blame the tech giants for standardizing deceptive designs. When you see new designers, developers, or researchers entering the industry, and they look at best practices, where do they look? They look at the biggest platforms, which aren't necessarily super ethical in how they approach their business and customers, but they've set the standards. Debbie, bad things other companies are doing end up as precedent. Super famous company did this, so it must be okay for us. Let's get the lawyers to write something in the terms and conditions. Trina, exactly. If it works for them, it will work for us. Ethical design is about looking at your own decisions and saying, why are we making this decision? What are the potential consequences? Is it because of standards? Or super famous company X is doing it? Should we do something else? Do we want to do something else? Ethical design starts in the decision-making process. Debbie, to me, one of the most blatantly unethical things about cookies is where they claim that companies have a legitimate interest in tracking what you're doing. Trina, why is it legitimate? Is it because their business will profit more from it? Why is it legitimate to me? In 99 out of 100 cases, it's because it benefits the business. That's the opposite of customer centricity, only caring about the business interest. UCD, user-centered design, explained later, has the whole notion of establishing and identifying business needs, customer and user needs, and then finding that sweet spot in between. Ethical design doesn't mean that you're a nonprofit or not making money. We live in a commercialized world. I don't belong to the group of people who genuinely believe that the commercialization of products is automatically evil and bad. But we have to create businesses that fundamentally respect the people that they sell to and the people that they employ. I don't mind a business making tons of money if they do it in the right way. I salute them if they're able to do that. Debbie, what about the perspective that says, by tracking Debbie in these subtle, hidden, lesser-known ways, we're ultimately giving her what she wants. This is proactively helping connect people with products and services they're genuinely interested in. Trina, I assume that's the reasoning used by companies using behavioral tracking and marketing. One question they forgot to ask themselves is, does Debbie want our help? Did Debbie ask for our help? And the answer is no, she did not. Therefore, it's unethical. Respecting people's privacy is not just about collecting their data unless they say yes, but also thinking about whether they have freedom of choice. At one of our ethical design events, Tiziana D'Agostino, D'Agostino, who specializes in behavioral psychology and UX, said that for nudging to be ethical, it has to have actual freedom of choice. There are so many gray zones in nudging because we can also discuss whether someone needs to lose weight or needs to get in shape. If objective parameters say that this is apparent, does that give us the right to invade their private space and say, hey, we have this product that could help you? We should and must have absolute freedom of choice. Debbie, we had a few days here in the house where we talked a lot about almonds. I didn't Google or research almonds. I didn't do anything on my phone or computer related to almonds. But we talked a lot about almonds because we had a house guest who was deathly allergic to almonds. Within about a day or so of scattered almond discussion, Instagram was showing me ads for almonds. My thoughts were, thing one, get out of my life. Thing two, they obviously missed the context. The context was, we can't give this person almonds. You would think that if they understood the context, I would have gotten ads for soy milk. But instead I got, go buy almonds, the opposite of what I needed. Trina, companies pay for their brand to be exposed to you. It's funny that in this case, it had the opposite effect. But this happens all the time. I have a Facebook account that I don't use very often. I make sure to never log into Facebook when I search online. One day, I was mistakenly logged into Facebook and I bought a face product from a website. I had said no to cookies, but perhaps they were using Facebook Pixel or something. The next time I visited Facebook, it was full of ads for face creams. I'd already bought the facial product somewhere else. You're too late. All the money these brands spent on showing the ads went to waste, and I'm not sorry. Debbie, I still hear people saying that we should make a product that is addictive and we should read books teaching us how to do that. Trina, it's definitely not ethical because the principles are usually to identify weakness. Get customers by finding a weak spot, tap into where people are weak, and take advantage of that. Being customer-centric and being focused on ethical design are very much a mindset. The mindset of finding weakness or creating addiction is the opposite. We have this product. How can we shove it down people's throats to the greatest extent possible and make the most money? How do we make them susceptible to our product? It's the complete opposite of trying to figure out what value we can bring to people, what problems are they struggling with, and how can we, in a respectful and meaningful way, help them solve that problem. Debbie, when I ask people to name a product or service they've been unhappy with, they could talk my head off for a week. When I ask them about a product or service they love that really fits their needs, it's hard for them to think of something. Yet many companies pretend they're on people's lists of what they love. Trina, very few companies are on that list. And the reason for that is that we remember bad experiences with twice as much emotion as positive ones. It's the reason why people can talk about bad experiences to a much greater extent than positive experiences. It's just the way that the human mind works, but companies tend to ignore this. Product is what we see. It's where ethical or unethical design manifests. I don't expect all companies to be on the highest level of the scale of ethical design. If you, as a company or as a professional, improved based on where you were last year, that's fantastic. I'd much rather look at incremental change and incremental improvement. That's what a transformation is. Transformation takes time. It's the long haul. As long as you progress, that's great. We can't grow things rapidly. Rapid or experimental growth often leaves lots of victims along the way. We won't have these victims if we choose responsible growth. It's extremely important to look at the consequences of the strategic decisions we're about to make. Who have we not thought about? Which target audience haven't we included? Debbie, I remember a SaaS system with a policy of not letting you export your data. Their perspective was, if we make it easy for people to leave, they'll leave. How can a company catch themselves in that moment where they're dreaming up something that sounds good in the meeting room but might be evil? Trina, there have to be people who are allowed to raise a red flag. Company governance has to allow and promote autonomy, including the autonomy to raise a red flag. I know a designer who works at a company with incredible governance. They told me a story that a relatively new employee noticed something that they were deeply concerned about. They raised that red flag to their manager, and everything stopped until they had investigated that concern. A relatively new, non-senior employee was allowed and encouraged to raise a red flag and was taken seriously. A business cannot prevent bad decisions if they don't let their employees raise red flags and take them seriously. Governance is absolutely key in making that happen. We've all been in a meeting room where a decision was made and you're like, this doesn't sit well with me. But you didn't have the autonomy to say, hey, wait a minute. You knew that the consequences of saying, hey, wait a minute, to your manager or a supervisor would be significant. As a CEO, you cannot possibly know everything that goes on in your engineering, UX, or marketing teams, but you can have opinions on things, and that's where it goes wrong. If opinion trumps professionalism, that's where the deep problems are. To mitigate or reduce these types of mechanisms, top management needs to understand what they know and don't know, and trust their employees to a much greater extent. We could also mitigate a lot of these things with measurements. Debbie, should companies have an ethics department? Is there an ethics officer? Trina, it depends on the size of the organization. Typically, as organizations grow, they become more hierarchic. A startup starts with a small team, completely flat. As the company grows, it starts dividing into silos. I generally don't promote the ethics officer because it's a function that's not tied to a specific department. I advise a governance model that specifically includes ethical decision-making. You could also have someone with a mandate who has a red flag in their hand and is allowed to raise that red flag. They answer up to top management. These things should be defined in the corporate manual and culture. It's important to verbalize and formalize these types of things. Without that, an employee can raise a red flag, but someone will dismiss it. The employee would be able to say, "It's part of our process. I'm allowed to do this." It's very important to give that kind of power to employees. Debbie, when it looks like unethical companies succeed, what's the incentive to be more ethical? Trina, it's not the first time that I get that question. There are a handful of reasons why it makes sense for a company to move more toward ethical design. One reason is the megatrends. We're seeing a significant increase in consumers who turn their backs on companies whose values don't align with theirs. Salesforce does reports every year. In the last one, they surveyed 8,000 buyers and consumers. 61% had turned their backs on a company whose values didn't align with theirs. Weblink, cxcc.to/A124. That's not just a megatrend, that's a smack in the face. Second, it's possible to run a business on sound ethical principles. It's good for employees and it's good for employability. We're seeing an increase in professionals who genuinely want to use their powers and their skills to do good. Instilling ethical design principles increase the number of people who will want to work for you, and they'll stay longer. There's also significant proof that ethical design makes happier employees. Proper governance means we're providing more value to customers. Most professionals would rather provide that value than use deceptive design. Weblink, cxcc.to/A125.